and grieve. And yet, Ariella and I deal with so many people, clients and in life, that don't make the time, make the space to grieve, whether it's a week, a year, a decade later. There's never the wrong time to grieve. And today we're talking about doing grief work, not just for yourself, though you are the starting point, but for those who follow in your footsteps, generational healing, and making sure that it's healing and not trauma. That's today's conversation.
So we also have just done a podcast on this, so you can check out our podcast this week coming up on Thursday. But really the idea is this, that we are in a pandemic that the experts say that will affect generations to come. And so when we think about grief and we think about loss and we think about all that we have been through this past year and beyond, our charge as the adults is to look at our children and our children's children and beyond and say, how do we want to grieve? How do we want to give ourselves permission to the feelings and the emotions and the losses that we are all going through, whether you have lost a loved one from COVID or in the year of COVID and haven't been able to fully grieve or bury your loved one, which is so much a process of healing, or just the process of grieving through. We are all grieving in our own way of our freedom that we once had, that we don't have right now. So the charge is really on us to feel so that we can look down our generations and say, do we want them to carry this burden and into their children and their children afterwards?
I think most people don't even think in terms of generations when it comes to grief. You know, it seems like something we should do because it's the right thing to do for us to live a healthier, emotionally more sound, meaningful life. And yeah, it benefits the people around us. But I've seen over and over again, both the positive and the negative of people who treat this generationally. I have seen so many families who have been ripped apart because grandma or grandpa or their grandparents didn't deal with it. And you can just see it kind of trickling down through the generations. You know, we talk, the obvious example is the Holocaust, right? A collective grief, of course, after the Holocaust. But one of the challenges was, for at least a period of time, as in generations, nobody was talking about it. It wasn't until relatively recently that survivors were invited to share their story, and that began a healing process in so many ways.
Well, I think the idea is that the survivors that were able to finally share their stories brought their stories to light. And so this idea of pushing down into the dark places inside of our bodies, because that's really where it's stored, is that, like, take the Holocaust, when you push the pain of that because it was too painful to talk about, you push it down. And then what we do is we have clients that have Holocaust survivors in their family. And what we see is trauma and night terrors and eating issues from starvation, you know, in the Holocaust, and many, many different things that come out in that person, even if it's 3 or 4 generations down the line. It comes out because it's not being dealt with. It's called epigenetics. It's this idea that what we don't deal with, what we don't feel in order to heal, is literally passed down in our DNA. And so it's kind of a new phenomenon, but it's this idea that are we going to be the ones that pass down this grief and this deep loss of COVID, just like the Holocaust? Or are we going to sit and bring it to light and really feel it and move forward?
You know, and it's like the Holocaust. I mean, certainly the Great Depression is another one I inherited in my family. A lot of consequences, as did so many of you, because of that period of time of scarcity. And just handing it down wasn't devastating. I don't think anybody in my family actually died from the Great Depression, but it started to form beliefs of there's just never enough. There's never enough money, and I got to deal with that, or I pass it down. But the same is true with grief, where if our kids watch us and they see us not dealing with my dad or my parents' death, that's how they learn. And maybe you sit in Shiva, you have a wake, you do these rituals, or maybe this past year you didn't have the opportunity, but that doesn't mean you're actually inside the ritual, inside it. And you know, as you talk a lot about, feeling your feelings so that you can feel it and heal it and not pass it down.
I remember when my mom passed away 2.5 years ago, and There was a moment in time where I think I had just gotten back home to Denver from the Shiva and from just being at the funeral. They were there, and then they came back here, the kids, and I remember breaking down several times and wanting to run away, not wanting them to see the tears, and instead allowing it to be a moment where we actually all cried. And our children in particular had a very hard time with the loss of her grandmother and her grandfather, all the same period. And I just, I gave the kids permission because I showed them, they kind of know that their mom cries. So I gave them permission to cry when they needed to, and to talk about Nana and talk about Papa, and to be in it when it comes up, you let it arise. And that really helped their grief, and to let them know, like, you bring your dad to light all the time, and to really let them know that nothing is off topic, because if things are off topic, then they get stored inside.
Yeah, and we're talking a lot about it in our podcast, so you'll jump over and check it out. It's all about breaking the cycle, passing down shadows, because that's what we're talking about, are the shadows that accumulate in individual lives, in family lives, in nation states, in the world. And there's different levels and layers of shadows. Shadows don't just go away. You've got to flip on a light switch in order to dispel the darkness, or else it's going to be dark. And so what we're talking about is shattering the shadows, not passing down these bags from generation to generation, but being the type of man, the type of woman who understands that this is about you, but this is about your children, your children's children. You do this work for them and for those whom you'll never meet, but they will be grateful that you showed up and you did this work.
Yeah. So check out our podcast coming on Thursday, and we will send a link in our group and our page, and just drop us comments. Let us know, what are you dealing with? What is your grief? What do you think about this collective grief going on right now, and how it impacts our future generations?
I just want to say we have a new program coming out called Carry the Fire. It's a 28-day grief retreat, do it yourself, multimedia, to guide you at any point after the loss of a loved one. It could be a year, could be a day, could be a decade. It doesn't matter. But it walks you through the process with some of our best rituals and tools. Offer that to you, but as a kind of a taste of it, we have this thing called Creative Kaddish. It's in the show notes. You can just hit a link and go check it out. It's a ritual to help you transform your darkness into light. So we'll see you soon.
Namaste, everyone.
Shalom, salam, peace.